Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review, or almost my favourite film of the year. This is from 1970, and it's The Rise and Rise of Michael Rimmer, starring Peter Cook, directed by Kevin Billington, who directed Voices, which is available on Indicator, and also Light at the End of the World, the good old fashioned yarn with Kirk Douglas and Yul Brynner, based in the Jules Verne story. This was written by Billington, but it's also written by John Cleese and Graham Chapman, and Peter Cook himself. So there is certain moments of Monty Python. This is a film that unfortunately 54 years later is still as relevant, even more relevant than when it came out. It bombed when it came out because probably the story seemed ridiculous to people in 1970. Unfortunately, it's almost a documentary for people living in 2024. So before I go on about the film, I'm just going to mention the cast, because it's a Richard Lester level cast. Again, some of these names you won't recognise, but you'll certainly recognise their faces. I mean, it's almost like a who's who of British cinema, certainly of male actors in the 50s and 60s. So you've got Peter Cook, but Denholm Elliott is in it, Arthur Lowe is in it, John Cleese and Graham Chapman are in it in smaller parts. Ronald Fraser, James Cossins, or I Die in North Africa, if you've seen How I Won the War, Valerie Leon, who's one of the few women in it. There's only really 2 women in it, and obviously Valerie Leon, she does get a bigger part than she got in quite a lot of films. I do feel for Valerie Leon. She should have had a bigger career than she did. I mean, she was in James Bond films, but she was like receptionist or something. I mean, she should have had way bigger parts, but I guess some people would say Larry Leon's parts were big enough. Dennis Price, Harold Pinter, Ronnie Corbett is in one scene. Of course, Ronnie Corbett and Valerie Leon were in No Sex Please. We're British, along with Arthur Lowe. Norman Bird, Graham Crowden, Richard Pearson, George Cooper, Ronald Culver, Jonathan Cecil, Frank Thornton, Guy Middleton, Julian Glover, Sinead Kuzak's in it but uncredited. It's literally a who's who. Now lots of people just have like one scene and probably just wanted to be in it, because then it was Peter Cook and 2 parts of Monty Python. So the story is about Michael Rimmer, played by Peter Cook, who works in this polling company run by Arthur Lowe, but it's a disaster. We're just introduced to him as he's walking about like with a clipboard doing kind of an efficiency study or something like that, even though nobody quite knows who he is. It just seems he's just appeared out of the blue. And the genius of this character is there is no history, has no history, has no backstory. We literally just join him on this day and we see the rise and rise. This in some way can be seen as a double bill with Bedazzled by Stanley Donen, with Peter Cook as the devil and Dudley Moore, 1967. You could actually watch this as a double bill. So he quickly kind of takes over the company, does a report for Dennis Price, who owns the company, who's basically just fishing in a river and doesn't realise that his company's losing this much money. So Arthur Lowe is fired but kept on as basically the tea boy because he's made such a disaster, and Peter Cook takes over and then decides to do a poll on the sex habits of Britain, which gets him notice, and he goes on a show hosted by Harold Pinter with Denham Elliott, who works for another polling company, who Peter Cook then poaches and uses Denham Elliott's insider information to ruin the other company by having a hilarious poll about religion. And that's the scene which features Ronnie Corbett. And of course Valerie Leon, who's Arthur Lowe's secretary and then becomes Peter Cook's secretary, is kind of used in that scene because Ronnie Corbett only goes up to her chest. And then Peter Cook's now company has a poll on the by-election and predicts it completely accurately because they interview or they poll everybody. You know, obviously some polls are like 100 people are asked, 1,000 people are asked, and Peter Cook just decides to poll everybody, so they have an absolutely precise result. So again, in some ways this is almost an Omen unofficial sequel, even though this was before the Omen. He then garners attention from the Tories, whose leader is Ronald Fraser, who gives a hilarious performance. Because the Tories at this point in this universe are in the opposition. The time in 1970, Harold Wilson's Labour government and Edward Heath of the Tories won a surprise victory in 1970. So the Labour government is in power in this filmic universe, so the Tories are the opposition, and Ronald Fraser is the leader, and then Peter Cook uses campaigns and to end up getting the Tories into power, and then Peter Cook becomes an MP and then Chancellor and so on and so forth. Again, at the time, as I said, maybe this film seemed a bit far-fetched and ridiculous, whereas now it's practically a documentary. You know, in 1970 the kind of concept of spin doctors or the media and the news not telling you the truth maybe wasn't as big of an issue. You know, news was actually like fact or reporting facts, whereas now it's just people giving their opinions. So maybe in 1970 people were a bit more naive perhaps, or just didn't have access to as much information as we have now. There's a brilliant thing about finding a use for the army, because they make up this thing of all their super weapons that they're going to show off, and then it turns out they're just models. And Michael Rimmer, Peter Cook's character, is pretty much, we're going to save billions of pounds because all we need to do is show them the models, and that's a big enough deterrent, and it means everybody else can get 100% pay rise with the money we save. There's a lot of ideas in the film that I'm surprised governments haven't actually used. But because of the army, actual soldiers might not have too much to do, they devise a plan of stealing Switzerland's gold by using biological weapons, i.e. the British cold, to get the gold out of Switzerland. And then to kind of answer where they kind of got this gold, they make up a story that it came out of the North Sea. They suddenly found this gold deposit in the North Sea, and again, maybe in 1970 that was just ridiculous, whereas as we know now, there's been plenty of wars that have been fought for perhaps not the reason that governments have said they were fought for. So again, it's kind of it's a funny film, but it's also pretty sad and tragic because again it's almost real life really. Governments lying about where things come from and why they go to war. I mean, it's a crazy idea. There's wonderful stuff on immigration, which is obviously still pertinent. It's again, there's some low-hanging fruit jokes. There's some jokes that haven't aged as well. Same way some of Monty Python hasn't really aged as well as the kind of classic genius stuff. But again, if you're a fan of Monty Python or you're a fan of Peter Cook, you should get a lot of enjoyment out of this film. It is a kind of indicator film, so hopefully it'll only be a matter of time before it gets a decent Blu-ray release, maybe by indicator. Even though I would say there's actually a director's commentary on the DVD, which is quite good. I haven't listened to it yet, but it's good to see there's actually a commentary. I mean, Peter Cook, as he's becoming MP, his polling company do a poll on who he should marry, and the kind of most liked people in the country, and number one's the Queen, so he's obviously not going to marry the Queen, and he ends up marrying a show jumper, which is one of the parts of the film that isn't that believable, because I mean, Valerie Leon's his secretary. Why wouldn't you just marry Valerie Leon? But obviously she doesn't have the profile and isn't as popular as the show jumper. So again, even the concept of public figures marrying women that are kind of popular or will help their careers. I mean, what a concept. Obviously that's complete fantasy. There's just so many wonderful one-liners. A lot of them just kind of come thick and fast. There's little details. John Cleese's character, who's one of the employees at the polling company, practices ballroom dancing during his tea break. He's dressed with the bowler hat very much like the guy from the Ministry of Silly Walks. There's a lovely little sign over a fire extinguisher that says "Do not use after 1958". One of the folders in the office is Arthur Lowe's ogling Valerie Leon. It's like a swastika in one of the folders. It's full of little details. There's a lovely JFK assassination scene that's rather amusing. It's got an absolutely beautiful last freeze frame shot of the film, and it does kind of remind you how good Peter Cook was. It's just, again, very much like Oliver Reed and his self-destructiveness. Peter Cook's self-destructiveness was almost even greater than Oliver Reed's. He died when he was only 57. But again, very much like Oliver Reed, if you were in Britain at a certain age, you remember Peter Cook on chat shows looking as though he was in his 70s, but he died when he was 57. And again, if you see him in this or Bedazzled, he's a good looking guy, he's slim, he's charismatic, but he always had a twinkle in his eye, he always had a devilish grin, and he's just got that brilliant persona in this as well. Again, the masterstroke of him having no history, no backstory, and it makes a very good companion piece to Bedazzled, because again, there are people who believe that the royal family in Britain or the elites are lizard people, and Peter Cook gives a great performance as a lizard person. In this film, again, there's just so much to enjoy if you like a certain kind of humour. Again, it's not perfect, there's some obvious jokes, but some of it is just really clever. Like Graham Crowden plays the kind of religious figure. In the polls, the biggest problem with the church is the fact people struggle to believe in God in the first place, as far as it does seem a bit far-fetched, which he kind of agrees. He always mixes metaphors, and even in the small part that he has, he's just got comedy gold coming out of his mouth constantly. The fact that they have a celebratory kind of dinner after the by-election success, but they have it in the zoo, which is quite amusing. Or when the Tories get in, they have a meeting at Chequers, and they're all in this outside trestle tables and champagne and food, and they're there to discuss, how they don't have any money in the country, and we're supposed to keep austere. Meanwhile, they're having like a banquet in the back garden. There's just lots of little absolute pearls of wisdom in the film. But again, you can understand why it wasn't popular. But nowadays it's actually more relevant than when it was made. Because you do get people going, "Oh, why do you watch old films?" Because it's different times and society's moved on. And it's like, yeah, but we watch older films because society hasn't really moved on. They might have moved on round the edges, but in the heart of society, it's the same thing. And one of the great ideas in the film is when power is achieved, it's then let's ask people's opinion on everything. Let's have a referendum on every single subject, so people get tired of giving their opinion on everything. And then the last one is, let's take all that out of your hands and just let the head of the country decide. So you end up, it's almost a presidential country, a republic in Britain, or a dictatorship. And again, I'm surprised a government in Britain hasn't actually used that. Let's just bombard people with all these decisions they have to make until they just get so sick, fed up of it, and just go, don't consult us in anything, you just go ahead and do what you like. I mean, granted, the government does that anyway. But it's just, it also has a beautiful scene that is kind of the truest depiction of the relationship between the UK and the United States, when Ronald Fraser goes to visit the president and he's in a queue outside, pretty much jumping up the chairs as people go in. It just gives the perfect depiction of the way America sees the UK, and then the lies that are told when Ronald Fraser, the Prime Minister, comes back. There's so much truth in it, and it is well worth a look, especially if you have that kind of sense of humour as John Cleese, Graham Chapman and Peter Cook. It tickled me completely pink, and it's good to see Valerie Leon actually getting more screen time than she usually does, because she should have been way bigger than she actually was. And on that bombshell, thanks very much for watching this random review of my almost best film of the year, The Rise and Rise of Michael Rimmer. Please let me know if you've seen the film and what you think of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.